The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson. Hello and welcome to History with Jackson, the home of accessible and digestible history. And welcome to our Chalke History Festival special series, where we'll be talking to some of the historians, living historians and performers here at Chalke about what they're doing at the festival and their work. Now, Chalke History Festival will be covered comprehensively through History with Jackson, be it on our social media, our blog, and our podcast. So if you wanted to check out more and learn more about what's happening at Chalke, do head to the links in the description below. Now, without further ado, I'll leave you to our Chalke History Festival special series episode. So hello and welcome to our Chalke History Festival special series here on History with Jackson, and we're joined by Tim Bouverie. How you doing?
Very well, thank you, Jackson.
No, thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, we're at Chalke now, and I love Chalke, it's amazing. But you're moderating a couple of talks. How did that come about?
Well, I was asked by James Holland if I would talk about that small subject, leadership in history. I said, this is a subject that could be seen from space. And he said, no, but it's fine. You're going to have Tracy Borman, who's going to be talking about the Tudors, and you'll have Michael Wood, who will talk on the Anglo-Saxons and China. But these are still subjects that could be seen on space. So we had a panel discussion on the importance of leadership, and although a lot of people who will come to Chalke Valley will have been just brought up on kings and queens and prime ministers, and that's what makes history. But I find the trying to separate out at what point a leader is simply cresting a wave of social or economic change, or is actually carving out a whole epoch or a whole event. That is a really crucial question. So we got into some very good debates about the merits of leaders from Alfred the Great to Elizabeth I, and some more contentious issues as well, such as to what extent were some of these very well-known Tudor monarchs actually the ciphers for their well-known advisors like Thomas Cromwell or Thomas Wolsey, or whoever it may be. So we did that. And today I'm interviewing the former president of Estonia, Toomas Ilves, who has had a remarkable career, both as the foreign minister of Estonia before he became the president. He was before that the Estonian ambassador to the United States. His family fled from Estonia in 1944 as the Soviet Red Army retook those Baltic republics, which had only been able to claim their independence from Russia in 1920. And he, I think, is going to have some really interesting reflections on the scale of the challenge of Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, and if it's not Czechs there, possibly further afield.
And it's great to hear how much research you've done into the people you're working with, and just how interested you are in these subjects. I think that always makes a good talk. But I think I want to dive down into the dynamics of moderating a talk now. You know, when you have two juggernauts like Michael and Tracy, who have got very different views on who these greatest leaders are, how do you ensure that there's balance in these conversations? Well,
you don't need to do very much work with either Michael or Tracy because they are, as you say, absolute titans of their field. I think the difficulty is you want to try and narrow the focus so that there is an actual question that we're dealing with. To what extent is charisma important in a leader is less interesting. That when does charisma become slightly less relevant? And how is charisma conveyed or endowed upon a person? Because so much of charisma, if we're talking as they often were with hereditary monarchs, is bound up not in the person but in the office or in the actual title that they held. I mean, if we could think of one of our most recent monarchs, Elizabeth II, probably didn't actually have enormous sort of Gandhi-esque charisma, but people were always unbelievably excited to meet her by the very fact that she was the Queen. So I think you want to narrow the question. You want to make sure that both sides are addressing the same question. One person isn't talking about charisma while the other person's talking about somebody's military prowess or strategic nous.
I think that's a really interesting spin on that. You know, looking at not only the charisma of the leader, but the charisma of the office. Now, you've done some work on Adolf Hitler, and there's a degree of charisma there, but does that tie in with the office or the leader?
Adolf Hitler, I think, is different. I think he obviously did have a serious and very sinister, as we would now see it, charisma. He won elections. He came to power in Germany democratically, and it was a new party, the Nazi Party, even if it had been sort of founded as the German Workers' Party before he became its leader or Führer. And these speeches, the sort of messianic zeal that he was able to convey, and like all great populists, and he was maybe the greatest of all populists, he was able to tap in, not so much to the hopes, although that did happen, but the resentments of those in Germany who had suffered defeat in 1918, had then suffered the effects of hyperinflation, of the degrading humiliation of this once great empire under the Weimar years, when they, as they saw it, a more decadent art was coming in, not the traditional German masculine art that they had been used to, and as also Hitler was able to so successfully convince them that a huge amount of their amount of their situation was due to an enemy within, and in this case it was, of course, the Jews who he so infamously blamed. So I don't think it was the office. Later on, it's not just the office, it's fear. I think that if people were not scared that they would themselves end up in a concentration camp or up against a firing squad, generals and other senior members of the regime would have been prepared to speak truth to power in a way which would have been beneficial to Germany when she was fighting this unbelievable war for European and perhaps world hegemony. So I think this is something that often happens to leaders. What makes you successful at the beginning, that I'm going for broke, that incredible self-belief, that arrogance, is often what then leads to your nemesis.
That is a fantastic way to answer that question. Now, obviously, the public look to historians, or mostly look to historians, to kind of offer remedies or insights to the situations of today, the issues of today, the politicians of today. From the talks that you're moderating and from your own work, how many lessons or how many solutions can you see to some of the issues that are facing us today?
Oh, do you want to ask a small question first? What are the lessons of history? That's absolutely enormous, Jackson. Well, it's a cliche to say that we don't learn the lessons of history. I actually think that we do often learn lessons of history, but we learn the wrong lessons of history. At the end of the First World War, to just give one example of a period I've worked on in my book, Appeasing Hitler, there was a great sort of post-mortem among the Allies, trying to work out why this appalling war had broken out and how the Allies, or how the West, could stop such an event from ever happening again. And they looked and they saw that there was a system of alliances before the outbreak of war in August 1914. So they said, right, well, we won't have any alliances. There was an arms race. Well, that's very simple. We won't have any arms. We will have disarmament. And these things can't work in a unilateral sense. You have to have a multilateral sense if you are going to disarm. It's no use Britain and France disarming while Germany is secretly rearming. There's no sense in Britain and France being coy about having a military alliance when Hitler is developing one with Italy and Japan. So I think it was a classic example of learning the wrong lessons from that conflict, as opposed to not learning any lessons.
I think that was a really nice way of answering such a large question, but showing that we can learn and we can move.
Well, except we didn't. I mean, I think you can look at most wars and say most people take the wrong lessons from it. I mean, another great irony is, if we looked at very recent history, the primary reason for the disastrous and shameful American-led British-supported invasion of Iraq in 2003 was that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. When that was shown not to be true, and when the war was shown to be a complete disaster, that so poisoned the whole debate around containment and containing dictators who had dangerous weapons, that when Bashar al-Assad actually used chemical weapons against his own people, the international community did nothing about it. So there's an extraordinary irony that you watch one dictator doing what you've just removed another dictator for, and you do nothing, and yet you go to war with a dictator who didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. So I do think that you could be so traumatized by the mistakes of the past that we are far more likely to learn the wrong lessons rather than the right lessons.
And thank you for bringing up the irony of some decisions that have been made in the international arena. But now, slightly on a happier note,
yes,
and a more fun note, we're at Chalke
yes.
Chalke History Festival now. Sorry, we're at Chalke History Festival, and you've been before.
I have. I've been coming for a decade.
And now, the fun question is, Tim, what has been the most exciting, interesting thing that you've learnt, seen, heard, witnessed here at Chalke at the History Festival?
Oh my God! I mean, there has been so much. What has been the most interesting thing I've learnt here at Chalke Valley?
We don't do small questions here on the podcast.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you asked me to think about talks going back a decade, and many. I mean, there's never a day when you don't learn something new. I like the fact that here you can see that there is such a historical hodgepodge of the living history, that you've got the Anglo-Saxons have absolutely no problem pitching their tent next to Rommel's Africa Corps, and Henry VIII and his wives are absolutely happy sharing their campfire with a Roman legionary. I love the general enthusiasm, and I think learning about the crafts it's so much not a field that I was knowledgeable about before. The craftsmanship that our ancestors had is something I'm always amazed about. But I'm afraid I'm failing you on one single historical fact, which knocks my socks off. But there have been too many.
Yeah, and I think that kind of sums up Chalke History Festival itself. Now, obviously people will listen to you talk about your work and about the moderation you're doing today at Chalke. But how can they grab a copy of your work?
They can grab a copy of my work by going online or into most good bookshops. I mean, there's bookshop.org if you want to support independent bookshops for Appeasing Hitler, Chamberlain, Churchill and the Road to War. You can order it through Waterstones, you can order it through Amazon, and it's available ebook, Kindle, hardback, softback.
Oh, fantastic. And if people want to get in touch with you, check out your work, or check out what you're doing online and get in contact with you, how can they do that?
If anyone wants to get in touch with me, I am readily available and happy to interact with people on historical subjects on either Twitter or Instagram. I'm easily searchable.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Jackson. It's been a pleasure.